This Max for Live step sequencer by M2TM is possibly one of the most full-featured step sequencers I've ever seen. It's a Max for Live Midi transformation tool, so I've got it set up there. And the way it works is if you type in 8 here, you'll get 8 steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If you type in 7, you'll get 7 steps, etc. So it modulates the notes that you've already gotten here. So for example, on the first note, if you increase the pitch, it'll increase the pitch on the first note for every 8 steps. If you increase the pitch on the third note, it'll increase the pitch by 1 on the next set of steps. This is per 8 steps. If I had per 7 steps, let's just reset this by clicking 0. If I had 7 steps here and set it on the 7th step, it'll increase it on the 7th step. And you can see there's 2 left over. And similarly, if you have 5 steps, it will increase it on the 5th step. So you can see how this can be quite powerful, particularly with polyrhythms. As you can see here, it's doing the increase by note, but you can actually do an increase, say, by every half bar. So for example, if we go back to 8 here, on the first half bar, you can see half of the bar, all of the notes have been increased. So you can see here, as you increase or decrease the notes in the half bar, it will do it like that. And similarly, if we select 3 out of 2, it will select the first 1.5 bars out of the 2 bars. So I hope you can get your head around the idea there. It took me a bit of a while to get my head around it, but I think I kind of get it now. And I'm going to use the most simple use case, which is note. And the reason I use note is because it will affect all the notes. But if you do happen to have chords in your clip, it will also affect the chords, but note only affects notes. I hope that makes sense. Now you'll see straight away you've got quite a lot of options, but let's just play here with pitch for starters. Let's hear how it just sort of sounds by itself, and we'll start adding some pitch modulations. Now here we've got the randomize button, so we can just keep randomizing and randomizing. And we can shuffle all the steps in the sequence. And we can press 0 to bring them down. We can randomize again and move them or rotate them 1 step to the right, or increase or decrease all of the values. So I hope that makes sense. And so what we can do now is we can start looking at all of the other options that it has. So for example, you can do pitch quantization. Pitch quantization basically moves the pitch in terms of scale degree. We've got a scale clicked on here. This is the E minor scale. That's the scale degree we're going to work in. So you see straight away it's in scale, whereas previously pitch wasn't. Let's randomize. Let's also use scale steps. And just change those around a bit. Just so you know that you can hear the scale. Now say for example you change the scale to a different scale, it'll put it into that scale. Let's bring it to a different scale. D minor. Let's try minor pentatonic. Let's try a different one. One last one here. We'll try mixolydian. So I think you get the idea there. So there's some really powerful options there for you. Then what I think is really interesting is one called octave. Basically, as you can tell, if you just select 1, it'll click it up 1 octave. You select 2, it'll click it up 2 octaves. So let's just start with 2 octaves up. Okay, let's remove all of that. We'll use 7 steps and we'll bring the octave up. You can hear straight away there's going to be some polyrhythms here. Now, by the way, this is steps based on the steps that you've got here per note. So if we happen to delete all of these and then set everything to 16th note intervals, it'll do the same thing, but per 16th note intervals. So let's transform this. So I used exactly the same structure, but every 7 steps here, and per note, it did the octave movements. We're going to go and select some of the other options. There's some really interesting ones. So for example, we've got velocity. So we can move the velocity up and down as we need to. Another one called velocity set. We can change the start position. Now with the start position, if we say, for example, increase the first one, we just increase the start position to start a bit later. We can start a bit earlier. I guess this is a way to sort of add a bit of swing to your Midi. This is a very well-defined swing, or not at all. And then you can also change the duration of the notes. So for example, we can make the notes a bit shorter. Let's go to the analog instrument. We can also increase the chance that the note will play. So we can reduce the chance for the first note to nothing. And we can also mute some notes. So for example, we can mute the first note or any note that we want. The other thing we could do is once again go and click 7. So every 7th step we can mute a first note. So you start getting that polyrhythmic effect. And then you've got the option to add notes to the existing pitch. So for example, you can add a second note here, and let's listen to that. Or we can add the notes based on pitch quantization. Or based on scale steps. Or based on octaves. Once again, I find octaves quite interesting. So for example, if you use 7th steps for each note, so all of this is doing is just adding extra notes. When you see the plus button there, you can also add, say for example, intervals. So for example, if I just select the second note, I'll add 2 intervals, or I'll add more intervals, but at a higher pitch or at a lower pitch. So let's just take a listen. Let's change that to 7ths. So that's super cool as well. The other thing we can do is we can actually add chords as well, which I think is really nice. So let's take a listen to this. So I'm going to add a chord to the first note, and it'll increase in density as you increase it. Let's do this. Let's just change this to free now. So that's also pretty cool. Then the other thing you can do is you can split or delete the notes. It's the same thing as chop, actually. Chop is also a MIDI transformation tool by Ableton. So check this out. So we'll chop the first note by 4. We can chop it by 2. You can really chop it quite a lot there. But let's do this. Let's chop it here by seventh notes again, polyrhythms again. Let's do it like this. Or by fifth notes. By the way, if you bring it down to 0, it's basically going to mute the note. So I slowed it down a bit, so I've got a note every 8th bar. I'm going to add some chord octaves. So I don't know if you've noticed this, but every time you go in, it'll just set everything back to its default, and then you can edit the clip again. But if you want to start from a specific point, you just select everything and press enter, and then that is the point that you start. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add some chords here. Select 8th, select 0, just add some really basic chords. So that's completely random, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and select velocity, and I'm going to increase the velocity like that. I'm going to go in and select a MIDI effect called expression control. Just going to apply it to the analog instrument that we had before. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to map the velocity to the filter frequency of the analog instrument. So that velocity movement is now going to modulate the frequency. Let's just reduce that volume. Let's just change the shape there. And we just reduce the amount of rise and fall. Let's just reduce it a little bit. Now let's duplicate the expression control. And on the second target, we're going to map the resonance. Just change the shape here a bit. We'll map this one here. To the detune. Let's add them every 3 steps. So I think that sounds pretty cool. Now let's try it on an impulse. So what we can do is just duplicate this track, and impulse is a drum machine. It's a kind of forgotten drum machine because everyone uses drum rack, but impulse is really good because you can stretch the notes. So let's go and select a impulse drum machine. Any one of these will do. Let's select all of those notes and commit them by pressing enter. And now we're just going to select, let's go ahead now and split and delete some of the notes. Okay, now let's do some expression control mapping like what we did with the analog. Let's map the first target to transposition. And let's map the second target to stretch. So I think it's super cool, and it's only 15 euros. And if you use the link in my YouTube description, you'll see a 15% discount on top of that. So it's actually pretty super cheap. And for what it does, it's amazing.